The termination letter felt heavier than it should have, just a thin sheet of paper folded twice, but it pressed into her palm like a verdict carved from stone as she stepped out of the hospital's sliding glass doors for the last time, the automatic whoosh sounding too cheerful for a moment like this, sunlight splashing across the pavement as if nothing in the world had changed even though hers had shattered quietly and completely inside her chest, her name typed neatly at the top of the page. Her years of service reduced to a paragraph of sterile words about budget restructuring and staff realignment, phrases so cold they made her fingers numb, and she stood there for a second longer than necessary, watching other nurses hurry past in scrubs of blue and green, some of them people she'd shared night shifts with, whispered prayers with, laughter and tears with, all of them too busy or too unaware to notice that she was no longer one of them, that her badge had been taken, her locker emptied, her identity peeled away as easily as adhesive tape, and when she finally turned toward the road leading away from the hospital, the strap of her worn handbag digging into her shoulder, she chose to walk instead of waiting for a bus she couldn't afford anymore, each step echoing with the quiet question she was too afraid to ask out loud, "What now?" The city felt different when you were unemployed, harsher, louder, every car horn like an accusation, every billboard advertising success and luxury mocking her with a grin, and as she walked, memories began rising uninvited, flashes of hands she'd held in the dark, patients who'd whispered, "Thank you," like it was a final confession, nights when she'd skipped meals to stay beside a crashing heart, and mornings when exhaustion had followed her home like a shadow, all of it now dismissed by a single signature from someone who had never once stepped into the chaos of an emergency ward, never smelled blood and antiseptic mixed with fear, never felt the weight of another human life resting entirely in their hands. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket and her heart leapt foolishly before sinking again when she saw it was only a bank notification reminding her of an overdraft she already knew about, and she slipped the phone away, swallowing hard, lifting her eyes to the sky where clouds drifted lazily, unconcerned with rent deadlines and grocery lists, and she laughed under her breath, a small broken sound, thinking how strange it was that the world kept spinning at the exact same speed even when yours came to a grinding halt. She passed familiar streets, a bakery she used to stop at after night shifts now smelling like temptation she couldn't justify, a bus stop bench where she sat down for a moment because her legs suddenly felt too heavy, elbows resting on her knees as she stared at the cracks in the pavement like they might form an answer if she studied them long enough, and in that stillness the fear finally caught up to her, wrapping around her ribs, tightening her breath as she thought of her aging father who depended on her income, of the tuition payment she'd promised her younger sister she'd help with, of the identity she'd worn so proudly, nurse, and how naked she felt without it, tears threatening but never quite falling because she'd learned long ago how to lock them away for later, how to function even when breaking was easier. When she stood again and resumed walking, she didn't notice the distant thudding at first, a vibration more felt than heard, like a low drumbeat beneath the city's usual noise, and she kept her head down, counting steps, replaying the conversation from the administrator's office over and over, wishing she'd said something sharper, something braver, until the sound grew louder, slicing through traffic and chatter, causing people to slow, then stop, faces turning upward in confusion, and she followed their gaze reluctantly, squinting against the sun as two dark shapes appeared on the horizon, growing larger with impossible speed, the wind picking up around her, hair whipping across her face as the unmistakable roar of helicopter blades filled the air, powerful and urgent, scattering dust and paper, making shop signs rattle and car alarms scream, and still she didn't understand. Not until the helicopters descended toward an open stretch of ground just ahead, so low and sudden that she instinctively raised her arms to shield her face, heart pounding, ears ringing, the world narrowing to sound and wind and chaos, and then she heard it, cutting through everything, amplified by a loudspeaker and raw urgency, a voice shouting, "Where's the nurse? We need the nurse right now," and the words hit her like a physical blow, freezing her in place as if time itself had stuttered, her first irrational thought being that they couldn't possibly mean her, that there were dozens of nurses in this city, hundreds, thousands, people more important, more employed, more official, but the voice came again, louder, desperate, "We're looking for the nurse who just left St. Mary's. Where is she?" And suddenly eyes were turning toward her, strangers pointing. Murmurs rippling through the crowd as recognition sparked somewhere she couldn't see, and her breath caught in her throat, the termination letter crumpling in her fist as disbelief crashed into fear, into a fragile, flickering sense of purpose she thought had been stripped away just minutes earlier, and as uniformed medics rushed toward her through the dust and wind, calling her by name like it was a lifeline, she realized with a sharp, almost painful clarity that whatever was about to happen. Her story was far from over, that sometimes the moment you think you've been cast aside is the exact moment the world calls on you in the loudest, most undeniable way, and if you're watching this right now, standing at your own crossroads, feeling unseen or discarded, stay with this story and make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will remind you that purpose doesn't disappear just because someone tries to take it away. It waits for the moment it's needed most, the wind from the helicopter blades tore at her clothes and thoughts alike as the medics reached her, one of them gripping her arm not roughly but with the unmistakable pressure of urgency, shouting her name to confirm what the crowd had already begun to whisper, and in that moment she felt the strangest shift inside herself, fear giving way to instinct, the same instinct that had guided her hands through countless emergencies. Because even though she was no longer wearing scrubs and her badge was gone, the nurse in her had never left, and when the medic breathlessly explained that a multi-vehicle collision on the highway had trapped a critical patient with massive internal bleeding, that the nearest trauma surgeon was stuck miles away, that they needed someone with her exact emergency experience immediately, something clicked into place like a lock finally turning, and she didn't hesitate, not once. As she nodded and followed them toward the helicopter, the crowd parting like a living corridor. Phones raised, mouths open, strangers watching her step into a role she had been told only hours ago no longer belonged to her. Inside the helicopter the noise was deafening, but clarity washed over her as she crouched beside the injured man, blood seeping through makeshift bandages, his skin pale, pulse thready beneath her fingers, and everything else fell away, the hospital politics, the termination letter now forgotten on the ground below, the fear of tomorrow, because right now there was only this life, fragile and slipping. And she worked with a calm that surprised even herself, issuing commands, adjusting pressure, guiding the medics through procedures she'd done 1,000 times but never under a sky like this, never with the city shrinking beneath them as they lifted off, and as the helicopter raced toward the trauma center, she spoke to the patient softly, telling him to hold on, telling him stories he might not even hear, because she knew that sometimes hope mattered as much as medicine.